It is great to see all the people who are introducing themselves in the chat. A lot of names I'm recognizing, which it's great to see all you joining us today. And I'm really looking forward to talking with you about this topic. And for those who will be joining us in the workshops next week and the week after. As Maribel said, it's uh, really exciting to get to talk to you all in those workshops. Those are great because it gives us a chance to really sit down and talk together about what's going on in the topic and how we can use everything that we have learned and then ask questions about anything and everything involved in teaching English language learners. And and like she said, those are not recorded. So it's really a chance for us to get in and talk and share and see what we can learn from each other. I would guess that at this point, I've been doing Teacher Training Plus for about 3 years now. I'm guessing most of you guys know who I am. But for those who don't, my name is Reid. I am the program manager for Literacy Volunteers, Charlottesville, Albemarle in Charlottesville, Virginia. My program does one-on-one tutoring, and so I oversee all of our volunteers and help them with all things curriculum. And so it's always exciting for me to get to share what we're doing here in Virginia and talk to people from all over the country. And I saw some of the folks coming through, people I have presented with in California and Oklahoma and Kentucky and Florida and New Jersey. And it's just great getting to see all the people who are coming back and that I'm getting to share with some more. It's just really exciting, and I'm really glad you all are here. So today we are going to be talking about working with conversation skills. And I know for a lot of people, it's a bit tricky. How do we teach conversation? How do we teach somebody just to talk? And so we're going to look at some of those details of how we go about teaching those conversation skills. And so by the end of today, we're going to talk about you're going to be able to look at the benefits of explicitly teaching conversation skills and then looking at different learning material and how we can make that work with what we're teaching. We're going to break down a conversation and look at the pieces of that conversation and what are some techniques we can use to teach those to our students. And then for all of you who've been with me before, I cannot go through a presentation without ending with some strategies and tips of what you can do to put these things in practice and what you can use to get started in your lessons. But I am going to start with talking about just the idea of explicitly teaching conversation skills and why I think this is so important. For the most part, I find that the way textbooks present conversation skills is a little tricky. For the most part, it seems like what they do is they are presenting the skills as almost an afterthought of what their primary focus is in the lesson. So if they're teaching vocabulary and grammar, an activity kind of at the end of the unit is, and now talk about it. And that's all we're going to do. And that I feel like kind of limits that practice to something that is just kind of tacked on at the end. And I like to see a more thought out process of how you go about teaching that. And it just seems like the textbooks really aren't guiding us toward that real world interaction, that real world discussion. And so I think that's what we as teachers need to step in and go, okay, so we're going to build off of what's in the book and add some other things that we can use to kind of build that idea. And then I feel like this is really impactful for the learner. It gives them that opportunity to practice in that safe environment in your classroom. And then whenever they're out in the English speaking world, they are going to feel a little more confident to go and say, okay, I can do this. I can have this conversation. One of the issues that I feel like is left out of the normal textbook approach are some of the sociolinguistic things that we have to think about as we are trying to develop a conversation. So much of the textbook conversation practice is about the vocabulary or the grammar or the pronunciation, but it misses things like code switching whenever we are in a conversation with our friends versus we're in a conversation with our boss or we're trying to get a new job, and how we switch the way we talk and the way we are uh, interacting with each other based on that relationship between the two people who are speaking is extremely important. We do that all the time without even thinking about it as native speakers. And I think it's something that we need to really address with our learners, that we can say, okay, this is something that happens and that you need to be aware of it and comfortable with it. And, you know, for some of our language speakers, our language learners, they only know how to say things in one way. And sometimes that can come across as blunt or too direct or even potentially offensive because of how they say it in a certain situation. Whenever you build into other situations, you need to learn that code switching or code mixing so that we can get to that point where the conversation and the speaking that we're doing is appropriate for the situation we're in. And that's a skill that I think is important for us to explicitly teach our students. Another one of those issues are our discourse markers. So many times our students will hear these, but they are then trying to look up in their dictionary, what does mean? And so they're not really understanding the flow of how the conversation is working because they are getting bogged down in what the discourse markers are actually doing in the conversation. So often these are just used to show active listening. But for somebody who's unfamiliar with how we do that in English, it can be a little confusing. And so when we look at some of those Discord markers that include things like sequence or organization or such, it's good for us to be thinking, okay, how do I teach my student what these markers are and how they can use them in their own conversation. But I feel like one of the trickiest parts is actually from implications. And in English, we tend to use implications in three different ways. There's the obvious, straightforward, standard implication. What you say is what you mean, and what you mean is what you say. And it's very direct and very straightforward. And you have the evidence to support that claim. It's raining. As we see in the picture, we have a woman with an umbrella and there's rain on the umbrella. We have all the evidence we need to say with confidence, it's raining. And so these standard implications, these are the ones that are most straightforward for our students as well. Then we start looking at this clash of standards where there isn't a lot of support for the claim that the student that the speaker is saying. For example, I think the restaurant is around here somewhere. They have limited evidence to support their claim. it's probably right, but if you're not a native speaker, that phrase or that sentence can be a bit confusing because you can't clearly identify, yes, the speaker knows exactly what they're saying, or maybe they do, maybe they don't. And uh, a native speaker will understand the, well, maybe they do, maybe they don't. But an English language learner may be thinking, yes, they're confident that it's here. And so those that clash of standards can be a little a little difficult for some of our learners. And then we have situations where we are looking at completely flouting the standard implication, where we're using sarcasm or irony or hyperbole to to say the opposite of what we're meaning. And honestly, is there anybody who delivers a line of sarcasm better than Meryl Streep in The Devil Wears Prada? And so that saying the opposite of what she's meaning, or in my example, I have a mountain of work to do. There's not actually a mountain in front of me. It's just a lot. And so that, being able to use irony and sarcasm is a bit tricky for someone who is just learning the language and they may not necessarily recognize it. And so I think it's important for us to keep that in mind when we're talking with our students and we're working with them on their conversation skills. How do we teach them sarcasm? How do we teach them to identify irony or hyperbole? And so I think those types of discussions are very important. Some of these are skills that are going to be a little easier as your student gets a little bit higher in level, but it is something that you are going to want to keep in mind. And if you're working with students who are at a lower level, you're going to want to be careful about using this in your classroom and your daily conversation with your students because they may not catch it. So when you do that, you may want to go through and explain the mountain is hyperbole, that it's really not that much. Probably wouldn't use the word hyperbole with a level 1 group of students, but I would explain how it's really this much instead of it being the giant amount that I'm saying it is. Another thing that's missing are the paralinguistic aspects of language, such as stress and intonation and volume and body language and facial expressions and eye contact. And I think it's that this is something that can be a challenge for some of our learners because in certain cultures, eye contact is not what it is in the US. And so those types of paralinguistic content exponents will tell us something that we're not really, they're not saying it, but we're understanding it because of facial expression, because of body language. But we can't necessarily attach our understanding of body language or eye contact to other cultures, and they can't attach theirs to ours. And so that's something that we need to also be talking about with our students as they are building these conversation skills so that they can see, okay, Americans do it this way, even though in my culture I do it this way, but I see what Americans are doing when they do it that way. And that's something that is often missing from the average textbook. You don't see textbooks that are talking about how much eye contact you should use in a conversation and how much is too much, how much is not enough. So that's these are the things that fall upon the teacher to say, okay, I'm going to teach these things in this conversation section of this lesson so that they are getting these skills as well. So that really kind of takes me to the parts of a conversation. And a typical conversation can be broken down into 3 pretty straightforward parts: a beginning, a middle, and an end. In the opening, that is usually what's going to set the tone of the conversation. It's going to kind of establish that overall atmosphere of what's going to happen in the dialogue. Is this going to be a friendly encounter? Is this someone new? Is this somebody I've known for a long time? And how is all of that going to connect? You use this for your greetings and introductions, and if you're introducing new people to each other, if you're being introduced to someone new, all of that's happening here. And by practicing this in your classroom environment, it's going to build the confidence that your student's going to need in order for that dialogue to happen more comfortably. And so anything we can do to help build confidence is a good thing. And so practicing how to start a conversation, I think is a great lesson for you to have with your students. I think it's a good idea to teach some opening phrases. How do we say hello? And when is hi better than hello? And when is hello better than hi? And when is how are you better than what's up? And when is what's up better than how are you? And so looking at some of those general openings and explaining in that code switching manner of which is a better choice in which situation. And then openings are also a great opportunity to ask engaging questions. How have you been lately? How's life? How are things? These are questions that typically come up in opening phrases. And I've had students ask me, I started a conversation with somebody and they asked me, how are things? What things were they asking me about? Which things were they expecting me to talk about? And what condition are those things in? And because of the use of that generic things in the how are things, that's something that was confusing for the student. And so I think it's important for us to show these phrases so that they see, oh wait, this is just a casual conversation to ask how life is going for them, and it's just a generic term. And then building off of that, you can look at those statements or questions that you can use to invite participation from the person you're chatting with. Tell me about yourself, or I'd love to hear your thoughts on such and such. Also a good time to talk about what is a normal and polite conversation and what is not so great in polite conversation with somebody you're just meeting. So having that conversation also is useful for you and your students. As we move into the middle section of a conversation, in a paragraph, this would be considered the body of the paragraph, or the body of an essay. So we had our introductory paragraph, and then we have the body of the paragraph, and then we have our conclusion. So this is the same type of situation. It's analogous to that body. And so the middle is where the discussion happens. This is where the bigger parts of the conversation come together, and it is that active mode going back and forth between listening to what they're saying, answering their questions, asking questions of your own, and participating back and forth, and having both members of the conversation sharing back and forth with what they would like to know, or what they would like their partner to know. So that middle section, like I said, is kind of the body of the conversation. In the middle, some useful phrases that I like to teach with my students will include how do we answer questions in the affirmative, how do we answer questions in the negative, and how do we answer those questions in ways that show the gradient between a strong yes and a probably yes and a maybe yes, or a strong no and a maybe no, or and some of the politer ways to say no. I don't think that's right, or that might not be quite right, is a more polite way to say something in the negative. And because sometimes a direct no can come through as feeling a little harsh, and that may not be the intent. There are also some neutral responses to questions. I don't know, I'm not sure. And a student may hear, I'm not sure, and not really understand what that's meaning. And so spending some time looking at under those phrases that are in the neutral, and how to include those. And some of our students may also come from a culture where a neutral is not really accepted, that we always are either yes or no. Then we may have some who come from a culture where we never directly say yes or no. It's always in the neutral, or it's in the neutral but slightly yes, or in the neutral but slightly no, even though slightly no means absolutely not. But we don't say absolutely not because that feels a little too rude or forceful in their culture. And so that's something that would be good for a classroom discussion of, is it acceptable to say things this way or that way in your culture, and how do we do that in English? And you can also teach them expressions on how to agree or how to disagree, and what we can do to build that, so that it's always about being engaged in the conversation. And sometimes these are going to come through feeling a bit like discourse markers, and that's okay. But being able to explain to our students that it's useful to put these in, so that the person you're talking to sees where you are, that you are engaged in the conversation, that you're understanding what they're saying, whether you agree or not, but you still have that connection, and that the person you're talking to sees that you're still engaged in the conversation. And then from there, you also have your expressions of opinions and emotions. These can also be positive, neutral, or negative. And so we want to look at these with our students about how do we include our opinion or our emotions without it feeling openly hostile, or too much in one direction or another. How do we say that politely, if politely is the best way to handle it? Or how do we say that a bit stronger, if the a bit stronger method is a better choice? And so, talking with our students about these are some phrases that you can use to express your opinions and express your emotions, and so that the person you're talking to understands where you are. And that actually really kind of builds toward the use of clarifying questions. As you know, or many of you know, if you listen to my presentations when working with lower English language learners, a lot of these clarifying questions are things that I teach on day one of every single class, because I want my students to use these. But they are also useful in a conversation. I want my student to say, can you repeat that? Could you say that again? What does this mean? Or what did that word mean? How do you spell it? I want my students to use these phrases. So I teach them very, very early on in my classes. And so I think it's a good idea for the students to know they can ask those questions when they're in the middle of a conversation. If a word came through that they didn't understand, it's okay to say, what does that word mean? Or, I think what you're trying to say is this. Did I understand you correctly? And paraphrase what you heard back, so that you are able to clarify what it is that your partner there is trying to say. And I think having those phrases in their pocket that they can use will really help them as they are progressing in their conversation skills. And that's going to take us to how do we close out that conversation. For the most part, it's a good idea to leave a positive, lasting impression on the person you were talking to. And so being able to say a proper farewell or display gratitude that they were chatting with you is really going to be useful for your students, and teaching those skills of how to end the conversation and is going to be important, because I know most of us have felt like we've been trapped in a conversation before that we're trying to get out of, and we don't have the proper words to end the conversation, or no matter what we do, it's not seeming to work. Uh, and so we can work with our students on what they can do to learn how to close that conversation. Uh, and so some polite phrases to include in the conversation. It was nice talking to you. I'll see you later. It was have a great day. So those types of polite ways of showing that you're needing to end this conversation and leave, I think are very important. And I think teaching these explicitly is a good idea. And also expressing some gratitude for the person you're talking to. I really appreciate talking to you. It was really nice. Those types uh, of expressions within that closing can be very useful. And if it's appropriate, uh, you know, offering to help. Let me know if I can help. Let me know if you need anything. Just ask if you need anything. I think that can be great. I recently heard what I thought was a great way to end a conversation. Uh, a guy was saying, "Okay, I want to take a quick selfie with us before we leave," which I'm like, "Oh, very clever. Great way to say I'm done, and we're going to end this conversation right now." But in a fun way of saying, let's take a selfie together before that happens. So I thought that was a really clever idea that he had of wrapping up the conversation, showing he was wrapping up the conversation, but doing it in a fun and inclusive manner. So let's talk about some strategies for teaching these skills. How do we get our students to where they're comfortable having this conversation with somebody new that they may not have connected to before, or they may only uh, barely know, their paths have only barely crossed. And so what can we do to kind of build up that confidence with our learners? And I think one of the best ways to handle this is we provide our students with a very rigid framework of, this is how it's done. We start and we teach it very explicitly. We do this and this and this, and we do it in exactly this way. And then as they build that skill, okay, we're going to take away some of that rigidity, and you can add things in on your own. And then we're going to take a little bit more away, and a little bit more away, and a little bit more away. And then they're able to do it fully on their own. But we start with giving them a very strict framework. And I think a great way to do that is a dialogue script, where everything in the conversation is laid out for the student to begin with. They know exactly what's going to be said, and they know what they're going to say. They know what their partner is going to say, and they will read it and practice it together and understand those pieces as they fit together and see it in a very concrete manner. This also helps with introducing the vocabulary and practicing phrases in context, and how we can look at the conversation as a very inside a very strict box. An example of this is something that I've taken from the American English state.gov website, and it is a dialogue that is laid out very straightforward, and they would be able to practice it in exactly the way it's written. And so they would have all the words in front of them, and they don't have to do anything outside the box. They can just go exactly as it's written. And that shows you, okay, in this case, it's a phone conversation where we have that introduction and the opening section with the greetings, and then we have the body, the middle part of the conversation, and then we end it with saying our goodbyes. And so we have it laid out in a very direct manner, and the students will see, okay, we do this, and then this, and then this, and then this. And so that's a great way um, to start that process. Then we start looking at frames. And frames are similar to dialogues in that they have the conversation kind of laid out. But what we've done is we're pulling out some of the words and some of the situation, and we're letting the students kind of fill in their own blanks. The way I like to do this is I lay out the frame, and then the two people can fill in the blanks together while they are sitting and practicing, and they will basically write their own dialogue. And then after we've done it a couple of times, I'm like, okay, let's try it again. This time you don't write it out in advance. You only just work with it in kind of a more conversational flow, where you start off with the frame that I've given you, but as you're talking, you start filling in the blanks. The nice thing about these is it's going to pull that anxiety level back. It's going to build the confidence, and as I've said several times, confidence building is kind of the key to being successful in that conversation. So if you look at this dialogue frame, it's the same phone call as before, except I've pulled pieces out, and I would let the participants start off by writing it in how they would what they would like to say, and then we practice it again a few times with just filling in the blanks on the fly, and see how much more comfortable they get with it after they've practiced it a few times, and that ability to just kind of fill in the gaps as they go. But again, we're looking at that scaffolding from the beginning. We've provided lots and lots of support by giving them um, all of the words, and then we've taken away some of the scaffolding by giving them a lot of the words, and then we're going to keep progressing on. So we end up giving them fewer and fewer of the words, and then eventually we'll get to a point where we've taken away all of the support, and they are just able to do the conversation on their own. Another type of frame is a chronology frame, and that's whenever you're having a conversation and they're telling you events that happen in a sequence. And so we can look at the frame like this, where the only thing that is given is the first, next, then finally, and the speaker would have to fill in the blank. Their partner isn't providing tons of extra dialogue here. It's just those markers for that they're working with, and they're actively listening to the conversation. But the person who is telling the story only gets the chronology part, and they have to kind of fill in those blanks. But again, so we've started where they have all of the stuff laid out in front of them, all the words are there, and then little by little we start pulling that out, so that they're having to include more and more of the conversation in their own. And then from there, we can start just providing them conversation starters, which could be things like visual cues that we could give them something that would set up their the general idea of the conversation, and let them build from there. Some of those visual cues could include things like who, where, when, and let that kind of guide where the conversation is going. And sometimes you could also include things that are just conversation starters. What is your favorite flavor of ice cream? What's your favorite holiday? What is your favorite activity to do when you're with your friends? What kind of movie do you like to watch? And having the conversations build naturally off of those conversation starters. And once they have gotten to that point where they can have those conversations just based off of a topic, and give them the opportunity to practice in an environment where that conversation is a little easier to do, and they can ask for help if they need it. So what are some tips that you can include, that I can include for you whenever you're teaching conversation? This one is going to be a little more directed to my folks who are working one-on-one with their student. In a classroom setting, it's true as well, but particularly for those who are tutors who are working one-on-one, I think it is extremely important for you to prioritize the talk time of your student. Let them, you need to be confident that they are speaking more than half the time. Get to that point where they are talking more than you are. You are asking questions and they're responding, and their response is longer than the question. Obviously, with a level 1 student, with a beginner, this isn't going to happen, but it's something that you can do to kind of build your way up to that point. I think that, when we're working with lower level students, obviously the tutor is going to be speaking more, but as we get up to the intermediates, we should start seeing that shift to where the student is talking more than the tutor does. I think a good way to do this is asking open-ended questions. If all of your questions are able to be answered yes or no, they're going to give you yes and no, and that's it. So asking those more open-ended questions, do the follow-up of why, jump in and channel your inner 3-year-old, but why, but why, but why, but why, and let them keep answering those questions, and let them dig a little deeper. And feel free to use the phrase, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. Let the student have the opportunity to answer a more elaborate question, because you're not asking just simple yes no's. I also think it's important for you to take notes as you are in this conversation. And the reason I say that is because I don't think it's a good idea to interrupt the flow of the conversation to fix grammar or pronunciation, unless the error is so drastic that you cannot understand what the student is trying to say. I think it's really important for you to just let the conversation flow. And by doing that, it's going to help the student build their confidence. And you can just take notes as they are talking. And then afterward, you can go back and address the issues that you heard. If there are minor pronunciation problems or sentence structure or grammar problems that you want to address, it's a good time to do that after the conversation has started wrapping up. But let them speak as fluidly as possible before you interrupt. Okay? Those notes can also be used by the student as like a concrete takeaway for as they go on and start practicing more. Also, I think it's important for you to be prepared for silence and be comfortable with silence. Part of the problem that we have as teachers is we want to help. and we say something and we ask a question and the student just stops for a second. Our gut instinct is, oh, they didn't understand. I need to jump in and help. And so you say it again, or you say it in a different way, or you try to provide a bit of the answer so they can build on that. And you jump in and start talking too quickly. And the problem with this is that you're not giving your student processing time. They need that opportunity to process what you have asked them. Keep in mind that for particularly our lower level students, what's happened is they have taken what you said and they've translated that into their own language. And then they've formulated their response to that. And then they are working to translate their response back into English, but they realize they don't know a third of the words they need for that. And so they take it back into their language, rearrange it using the words they do know, and then they speak. All of that takes time. And so I think it's very important for you as a teacher to give them that time, let them process. Watch their facial expressions, watch their body language, because you need to make sure that they are actually processing and that they're not just completely lost. And so I think it's important for you to be watching and observing what it is, how they're reacting. But for the most part, you need to be comfortable with silence and let it happen. Give them that time to process. And then if it's clear that they didn't understand, then you can paraphrase. Then you can ask the question again. But jumping in too quickly to help may not actually be helpful. And another big piece of advice, I think probably this is kind of my final piece, my final tip. As a teacher or a tutor, I think we need to be very careful about our own speech patterns. Whenever we are talking with our students, we need to be very careful about what it is that we are saying, what's the vocabulary we're using, what's the word order we're using, what is the pacing, and we need to be careful that our students are understanding. We need to be thinking about the clarity of our own speech. How clearly are we speaking to our students? Are they able to understand every word? When we speak too quickly, words get slurred and the sounds get a little mushy, and our students may not understand all the words because it wasn't very clear. And so I think it's very important for us to be thinking about how clearly am I speaking? How quickly am I speaking? Are they understanding all the words that I'm choosing? So how do we adjust our language? How do we adjust our speaking patterns and our pacing so that we are helping the students in the best possible way we can? And I think for newer tutors or newer teachers who are just starting out, the biggest mistake we make is speaking too quickly. And we have to slow that down. We have to create a pattern that the students are able to understand in an easier fashion. And so I think that this is probably my number one tip for teaching conversation skills. It's also just my number one tip for teaching English language learners. Just in general, pay attention to what you're doing. How are your own speech patterns affecting how your students are able to learn? So I'm hoping that today we saw that I think it's important for us to explicitly teach these skills. And I'm hoping you guys learned some strategies for doing just that. And then I think the biggest goal for all of this is to empower our students so that they can be successful in conversations with each other and with people outside of our classrooms, as their levels are growing, and that they're more confident and capable as they are speaking to others. Okay, so the first thing, before I jump into the questions, I do want you guys to scan that little QR code if you can, and share your thoughts on how things went today. I'm almost going to guarantee that the link is going to appear in the chat because Danielle is just amazing at doing things like that for me. So that is a survey, and let me tell you, I do read all of it, every single survey, probably more carefully than I should, but your opinion really does matter to me. And so that is going to take me to questions. And in order to do that, I'm going to shut off my PowerPoint so you guys can talk to me.
All right.
There's only 308 of you in here at this point.
Only.
So we're going to be really careful with how we're asking questions, that we're going to do that through the Q&A and not in the chat, because in the chat, it's going to be running way too quickly, and there's no way Maribel could be expected to keep up. So we're only going to ask those questions through the Q&A.
Hey, Stephen.
All right.
Yes.
Would you mind just putting up the QR code for a couple more minutes? A couple of people have asked for it.
I would be happy to.
And I'll put the link in the chat one more time.
Okay.
Thanks, Danielle.
No problem.
All right, Stephen, while you're doing that, I'll start at the top. Allison says our ELL program serves students who mostly want oral language support. How can we be sure we are supporting pronunciation, vocabulary, grammar development through conversation?
So I think the important thing to keep in mind is that we are doing, that we make a conscious effort to do all of those things. If we're having our lesson on vocabulary, we need to spend time looking at the vocabulary and practicing it orally. And if you've seen my presentation on pronunciation, you will know that one of my big rules is when you are teaching new vocabulary, you explicitly teach the pronunciation. You are very careful that they are pronouncing the word correctly from the very beginning. And then from there, as we have learned the new vocabulary, then we start putting it into practice. And then you build your dialogues, your dialogue frames, your conversation starters, all around the vocabulary that you taught that day. So if you have students who are very, very much wanting to work on their speaking and listening because they feel their reading and writing is strong, or their reading and writing aren't skills that they use as much, fantastic, that's great, you can still do that. But you build in that the vocabulary, the grammar, all of those pieces, like in the first half of the lesson, and then we put it into practice in the second half.
All right. Next question.
Danielle, can I turn this off now?
I think so, yes.
Okay, great. Okay.
Miss Teresa asked if the follow-up workshops are different, or is each one the same topic and information?
All three are different in a couple of ways. They are different in that I'm going to look at each of the subtopics in a little more depth in that sub area, but they're also different because they have different participants, and you will bring something into the room that only you will bring in, and so that group of people that we are working together with will make them all unique. But yes, the beginning part of each of them will be some conversation that we'll have that's unique for each of the three.
Thank you. Allison asks, and this was brought up a couple of times, do you have any advice for leveling conversation class material for a drop-in conversation group with learners across levels?
Okay, so there are a lot of ways to handle a multi-level drop-in conversation group. You can be thinking about this as you can pair people up based on ability levels. And personally, I think you should do all of these at different times. But if you divide them up as your lower level speakers working together, your intermediate level speakers working together, and your higher level speakers working together, and it's just groups that are roughly the same level. And then also mixing things up sometimes where you have a high level speaker working with a low level speaker and have them work together. So building those conversation topics around a variety of levels is a good idea. One of the things that you can do to build that correctly is, as you are looking at your topic, think about it. What's the easiest way we can say whatever the conversation builder is, whatever the topic is? Say it in that easiest manner. The lower level students need it. The higher level students will be able to take it and run with it. And so using it in whatever the idea is, say it in the easiest way you can. And then if you want to get more technical, you start with that base, and then you add, in this conversation, you will use these 5 words of vocabulary for your intermediate students, and then level it up further. You will also use those 5 pieces of vocabulary, and you will use this sentence structure. So you can kind of build it up. You can kind of level it up within the group if you've divided up based off of beginners, middle, intermediates, and advanced. But it really just, I think, starting with the idea of make it appropriate for the lowest level students, and the higher level students will tend to be able to be off and running with it, and they'll just be able to talk longer on the same topic.
Excellent. We have about 10 more questions, so I just want to give you an idea of where we are.
Okay.
I think we're going to cut it off at those 10,
Okay.
and then we'll get you the script so you can respond. William asked, dialogue scripts, is the assumption they can read in English?
Yes. And so if you're working directly off of a script, yes. When you're working with folks who can't read a dialogue script, then you're going to have to modify it in some way where they learn all the parts and pieces in an oral format, where you have to talk through each of the pieces and have them kind of memorize as they go. But yes, the use of scripts does assume that they have that foundation reading skill. So not necessarily appropriate with a basic level student who has no literacy in English. So these are going to be require some of those foundation level skills. So probably more in those high beginner and up ranges. You'll probably be able to get to do some of it with some of the higher low beginner students, those true level 1s that we used to call level 0s. You're not going to be able to do that.
A couple of questions around the scripts. What are some good websites for the scripts? And then someone else asked if they should use, do you advise generating dialogues using AI in your lessons?
So I'm going to start with answering the first one. The easiest answer I have to that is wait 2 days, and you're going to get a follow-up. Depending on how quickly they can put all the pieces together, usually it takes them a couple of days. In the follow-up information you're going to get after this, I think there's 3 websites that are included in the follow-up material that you will get just for being here that are dialogue scripts. And so you'll be able to go to those. So got you covered there, because I knew that was going to be a question.
Absolutely.
But the use of AI. So my feelings on AI are developing. And what I have found is I can lay out, as long as I lay out my question in AI correctly, I will get pretty good results. However, no matter what, you will go back through whatever it created and you'll make corrections and you'll make adjustments and you will rephrase things. Having AI do the lion's share of the work is great, but don't just copy paste and print without going through it yourself. I think it's a good idea for you to go through and read them all, make sure that they are appropriate, make sure they're using vocabulary that your students would know, and build off of it. Because I think that AI can be a great time-saving tool, but don't let it try to replace you, because it can't.
Excellent. Thank you. Some questions about advice for drop-in conversation group. We talked about that already. What are ways to teach and practice structured dialogue scripts with pre-literate students who are building literacy skills for the first time?
Okay, so whenever we're working with those pre-literate students and building conversation, we're going to be spending a little more time looking at how do we put together a sentence. And so I think that my first reaction is, if you're working with somebody who has little to no English and isn't literate in English or any other language, then let's jump straight to having a giant conversation is a bit of a jump that you don't need to be making. Let's spend a little more time building a good sentence before we worry about building a conversation. So let's look at, how do we build that sentence first? So I think that diving straight into trying to do too much before the student is ready for that is not a great way to set up your student for success. So instead of how do we get them to have a conversation when they know 150 words in English, let's build that vocabulary. Let's build that basic sentence structure first. If you are working with students who are mixed leveled, so that they have that, and I mean the student, not the class, where they have very high, they have intermediate or higher speaking and listening skills and little to no literacy skills, that's a different challenge. In those cases, you can work with your student in going through the pieces of the conversation orally so that they can hear it and then start playing it back based off of their skills with listening communication. And so you can work through these in an oral fashion before you go through it. But I do think you still need to be looking at it in a written fashion as well. And Maribel, I'm going to jump into more. Yes, I do, but I'm going to jump into something I just see in the chat. Do you recommend using correct English structure in your dialogue or normal spoken English? The answer is yes. Both. Sometimes we're going to be looking at things in correct English, and sometimes we're going to be looking at it in the way people actually talk. I think using some of both is a good idea. as I was saying much earlier, looking at that code mixing of when is it appropriate to use it this way, when is it appropriate to use it that way, exposing our students to how they should be speaking when they're talking to their boss, and how they will be speaking when they make a buddy. Being able to understand both of those situations and speak to both of those situations is very important. Sorry to interrupt
What
you,
is
Mabel.
No, it's all good. I like when you answer the questions. What is the frequency and duration of these conversation classes?
So at my center, we have conversation classes every week. They're 1 hour once a week, but we have 4 of them right now. And ours are leveled-ish. We have 2 that are in person that are mostly beginner level students, beginners, levels 1s, occasionally level 2s. We have a couple that are online that are also, they tend to be a little bit higher level. But that's the way our conversation classes work. They are 1 hour once a week. But as far as if you are doing this just as part of your regular class, if you have a class that is that you're meeting 3 hours a week, I would do at least half an hour to an hour of conversation within your average week.
What are some resources for teaching body language, facial expression, and eye contact?
I do not currently have anything like that, but let me see what I can find. And I would think that I'm assuming something like that exists, but I have never looked for it, so I don't know. But I would think that you could do something via like a charades type situation, where you could have various emotions in a bag, and people come up and act out that emotion. And so something like that, I would think, could be fun as a way to practice these and learn these. But it could be, but I don't have any like specific resources.
What are the advantages of encouraging students to not try to understand every single word versus carefully restricting our own speech patterns to the known vocabulary?
I don't know that I would necessarily restrict my speech to only known vocabulary. I would just be very careful about what vocabulary I'm using, and conscious of my words, so that if a student does say, okay, I did not understand, can you explain that word to me? You'll recognize that what's going on. But I think that in general, it's a good idea so that they're understanding in a regular conversation, that you as a teacher, that they're understanding a solid 70 to 80% of the vocabulary you're using. They don't necessarily need to know all of it, but I think there are some advantages for them to be able to figure things out through context. But again, we're going to be looking at things as in the level situation, where if we're looking at a super basic level student, they're not going to have a lot of vocabulary, so they're going to be filling in a lot of the gaps on their own. But make it easy for them to do that. Just throwing out a lot of higher level vocabulary just because, well, they'll need this word eventually, not a great choice.
Thank you. We'll do one more. Does that work?
Great.
If you're working with a learner who has no time to study outside of the one-on-one hour weekly sessions, what is the most important to prioritize in these sessions?
Well, I'm going to actually take that back to talk to your student, see what's most important for them. What are they saying? What's their priority? What do they need? the joy of one-on-one is you can build every single lesson around that student's needs. Are they needing work vocabulary? Are they needing vocabulary for working, going to the doctor or whatever? Talk to your student. What do they need? That's where you build it. In the one-on-one situation, it's always about that student-centered approach. What do they need? But also, if you're in that situation where your student doesn't have time to do homework, or they don't have time, or they don't have the ability to practice at home because nobody at home speaks English either. Give them homework assignments that are things like, go to the grocery store and ask somebody that works there, where are the cornflakes? They probably already know where the cornflakes are, so the answer is unimportant. The important thing is engage. When they're at Walmart, does this shirt come in a large? Does this shirt come in blue? Asking questions in places they're going to already be anyway, but have them engage with somebody new each week. You don't have to go out of your way to do anything crazy, just asking a very basic question. And with something like where the cornflakes, the goal is just having that basic conversation. Even if they just grab your student by the hand and lead them over to the cereal aisle, they were able to make themselves understood. So little practice like that outside of the lesson can be great, but inside the lesson, build it based off of what your student needs.
All right. That will conclude our Q&A session. Stephen, there's about 3 questions that we'll share with you post-webinar so that you can answer those questions. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. We appreciate you staying 10 minutes late.
Thanks, everybody. It was great to see you.
Thank you. Bye.